Before we begin, I thought it would be fun if everyone lets me know in the comments where they're watching this video from. And while you're down there, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's start today's episode. Blanca Adaro Alvarez. Blanca Adaro Alvarez was born in Quitoipe, Argentina, in 1952 to Spanish parents. In 1973, she and her two brothers, along with their parents, relocated to Ciules de Cebero, Spain. Blanca had been working as an elementary school teacher in Argentina, but when they moved to Spain, she struggled to find teaching work. She eventually decided to change careers and moved to the city of León, where she secured a job at Renfe, a Spanish railway company. Blanca regularly visited her family at their home, but in 1995, when she was 43 years old, she disappeared and never returned to her apartment in León. When her family hadn't heard from her for several days, they traveled to her home in León. Upon arriving, they found her apartment empty, and no one had seen her. All of her belongings were left behind. Despite this, her family didn't report her missing until 2 years later, in 1997. According to one of her brothers, they didn't file a missing persons report earlier because their father didn't want to report her missing. Shortly after she was reported missing, the police located her to be living in Guin. However, Blanca did not want to contact her family, and as she was an adult, the police could not force her to get in touch with her family. Her mother and the two brothers decided to visit her in Guin. They found out where she was living, but when they arrived at her apartment, she was already gone. The family would not hear from her for the next 8 years. Then, in 2005, Blanca would send a letter to her family with a current photo of herself. In the letter, she said that she was fine and asked for her father to forgive her for leaving. She also wrote that someday she would get in touch with her brothers. Her father would pass away a year later in 2006. Her family hoped that she would get in touch with them soon, but years would pass and they would hear nothing from her, leading them to believe that she may have died. In 2013, one of the brothers found a police sketch of an unidentified middle-aged dead woman found on Carmelo Beach, Santander. The unidentified woman was known as La Dama de Carmelo and was found in 2001. The family believed the woman to be Blanca. However, a DNA test ruled her out. To this day, La Dama de Carmelo remains unidentified. In September of 2020, a 68-year-old woman named Eva was reported missing in Paladiciero, Asturias, Spain by her neighbors after not hearing from her or seeing her for a few days. The police tried ringing Eva's doorbell, but no one answered. The door was locked from the inside, indicating that the woman was in the house. They finally broke into the house to find Eva sitting on the floor, unable to move due to a problem in her legs. She was conscious but extremely dehydrated and disoriented. She was transferred to a Juca hospital. Meanwhile, the police attempted to contact Blanca's family to inform them of her condition. To their surprise, the name she had been using in the neighborhood did not match the details on record in the address or in the UHCA database. It was soon discovered that the identity she had been living under was false, and her real name was Blanca Otero Alvarez. For years, Blanca had been living in Paladiciero under the alias Eva. During this time, she earned money by babysitting, caring for pets, and cleaning houses. In recent years, her health had worsened. Blanca's family was eventually contacted, and her 90-year-old mother, now residing in a nursing home in Guijen, was informed. However, no further information was provided about why Blanca had initially disappeared or the reasons behind her decision to remain distant from her family for so many years. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Moving on to the next case. Dana Bailey. On March 4, 1987, 21-year-old Dana Bailey called her parents to let them know she had just returned home to State College, Pennsylvania. She was a student at Pennsylvania State University and had been out of town visiting her fiancé in Washington, D.C. Her parents, relieved to hear she was home safely, said their goodbyes and hung up shortly after. The next day, Dana's mother decided to stop by her daughter's apartment unannounced. What she discovered was horrifying. Dana had been murdered. She was found naked, tied up, and blindfolded, with a fatal stab wound to her left breast. Investigators believed she had been attacked in her bed before her body was deliberately moved and positioned on top of a spread-out bedding set on the floor. Her remains were clearly visible from her bedroom window. The murder weapon was determined to be a steak knife taken from Dana's own kitchen, indicating that the killer had not brought a weapon but had used what was readily available inside the apartment. Investigators struggled to find leads at first. Dana was well-liked and friendly. She had no known enemies and was happily engaged, but then they discovered that somebody was watching the 21-year-old's apartment from a building that was being remodeled. Inside a room looking into Dana's home, they found shoe prints which matched those found in her apartment. Notably, 3 other apartments on Dana's floor were empty on the night of her murder, and her roommate was out for the night. This led to speculation that whoever was watching Dana had been doing so for some time, as he knew the comings and goings of those in the building well enough to plan his assaults accordingly. Authorities determined that the unidentified individual had gained access to Dana's apartment through a kitchen window that faced the area where he surveyed her. Despite managing to establish all of this and despite interviewing dozens of individuals and following hundreds of leads, investigators simply could not identify the culprit behind Dana's horrific murder. In 1991, a third party came forward with a tip. The third party relayed information divulged to them by a man who would not speak with the police because he was a wanted criminal. Investigators identified a potential suspect who worked as a heating contractor in 1987. Due to his job, he would have been familiar with the rooftops near Dana's apartment. The suspect was described as a white male, approximately 5 feet 10 inches, with dark curly hair. He was also known to drive a gold or bronze Pontiac Trans Am with stripes. Despite looking into this lead, investigators were unable to make any progress, and it remains unclear whether the individual was ever identified. Years later, in December 2003, authorities received an anonymous letter regarding the case. Dana's murder had remained dormant for years, and the letter seemed like a long-awaited breakthrough, a chance to finally identify a suspect. The letter named 2 individuals, but detectives were unable to establish any connection between them and Dana or her case. Authorities urged the letter writer to come forward for further questioning, but it appears they never did. Dana's case remains unsolved. If you have any information about her death, you can contact the State College Police at 814-234-7150. Moving on to the next case. Kelly Nolan. University is often a transformative period in a young adult's life, a time of transition from adolescence to adulthood, filled with new experiences, personal growth, and the pursuit of future aspirations. However, for some, those dreams are tragically cut short by unforeseen circumstances. Kelly Nolan was one such case. On June 22, 2007, 22-year-old Kelly, a student at the University of Wisconsin, went out for a night of drinking with friends in Madison. Kelly had a complicated relationship with alcohol, often using it as a coping mechanism during difficult times. She had suffered significant personal losses, first with the death of her father in February 2006, followed by the passing of her stepmother just a month before she vanished. Between 2004 and 2007, she had been convicted of drunk driving twice, leading to the suspension of her license and a 14-day stay in county jail for one of the offenses. Despite these struggles, on the night of June 22, Kelly was focused on enjoying herself. As the night progressed, Kelly's friends were ready to head home, but she wanted to keep the party going. Around 11:30 p.m., she split from the group and remained at a bar called the Lava Lounge on West Gilman Street, just half a mile from her apartment. There, she struck up a conversation with a young man she had met that evening. According to this unidentified man, he and Kelly had hit it off and spent a good portion of the night talking. He later told investigators that he didn't know her beforehand but had planned to walk her home because another patron, possibly someone she knew, had been harassing her. Tom Paris, a local bar owner and the young man's employer, recalled that this other man had given Kelly The creeps. Before leaving, Kelly told the young man to wait while she used the restroom. Shortly after, she was seen interacting with the same man who had been bothering her earlier. Tom Paris noted that both Kelly and the man appeared very intoxicated. In hindsight, he admitted he regretted not stepping in, saying, "I was stupid to leave her there when I saw her talking to that guy again outside, but I assumed they were friends." This was the last time the young man saw Kelly. After coming forward to police, he fully cooperated with the investigation, providing a DNA sample and undergoing polygraph testing. Both his house and car were subjects to extensive searches, but investigators found nothing. He has been cleared of involvement in Kelly's disappearance. Kelly called her sister in the small hours of June 23 while still at the bar, but failed to return home that night. She was never seen or heard from again. The 22-year-old's body was discovered several weeks later on June 9th. Kelly's body was discovered in a wooded area on the property of an elderly woman in the 4700 block of Schneider Drive in Oregon, Wisconsin, roughly 10 miles from her home in Madison. Investigators believe she died at the location where she was found. A post-mortem examination determined that Kelly's cause of death was blunt force trauma to the torso, resulting in multiple bone fractures. There has been speculation that she may have been deliberately struck by a vehicle, but authorities have not publicly confirmed this theory. Kelly's case has remained at a standstill since February 2007, though law enforcement has revisited it multiple times over the years. At the time of her disappearance, she was wearing jeans and an emerald green scoop neck top. Investigators are still seeking witnesses who saw Kelly on the night of her murder. If you have any information, please contact the Madison Area Crime Stoppers at 608-266-6014. Moving on to the next case. Louisiana Jane. Many of us share a deep, instinctive fear of passing away without being recognized or remembered. Some may simply want their loved ones to know them, while others aspire to leave a lasting mark on history. However, in certain cases, the identities of the deceased remain unknown, whether due to facial disfigurement, advanced decomposition, or the deliberate removal of identifying features such as hands and fingerprints. This was the case with the 2018 Texas and Louisiana Jane Does, some of the most unsettling unidentified cases in the United States that year. Their discoveries led to growing concerns that a serial killer might be targeting victims across both states. On March 1, 2018, a prison inmate assigned to cleanup duty in Louisiana stumbled upon the severed head of a woman in a grassy marsh near Highway 27 in Cameron Parish. The head, which was inside a plastic bag, belonged to a Caucasian woman with reddish hair. Experts determined that it had been there for several months at most, though not for years, and later estimated the woman's death had occurred between 1 and 6 weeks before the discovery. In June of that year, Louisiana authorities released a facial reconstruction of Jane Doe, describing her as a white or Hispanic woman between 30 and 50 years old with medium-length reddish-brown hair. Her DNA could not be matched to anyone on record. Jane showed no signs of trauma to the head, and she had extensive dental work implying that she'd been looking after herself or being taken care of prior to death. Just a few weeks after the first victim was uncovered on March 24 in Huffman, the discovery was made of another female head, also Caucasian with reddish hair, by a volunteer cleanup crew near Lake Houston. They also updated the case in June where a sketch of the victim was released. They disclosed details of Jane Doe, such as describing her top and bottom teeth as winged or slightly rotated. She likely had naturally dark hair as several inches of dark roots were coming through at the time of her discovery, and her eyes were light to dark brown. It was also found that her eyebrows and eyeliner had been semi or permanently tattooed on, and that her head had been in the grass for about a week. She had also been wrapped in plastic bags. One suspect in the case of both women was a man seen by witnesses throwing a plastic bag over a bridge where the head of the Lake Houston victim was later found below. He'd been spotted in the area several weeks before the first discovery was made and had gotten out the passenger side of a bluish-green extended cab truck. The truck was described as heavily rusted and had been involved in multiple accidents, with cardboard covering the missing back left passenger window. The man seen driving it was identified as a Caucasian male in his early to mid-20s, with short dark brown hair and a long fringe. He was estimated to be between 5 feet 4 inches and 5 feet 8 inches tall. Witnesses reported seeing him in early to mid-March, between 2:30 and 3 p.m., discarding the plastic bag. A criminal investigative psychologist believes that the same individual is responsible for both crimes and is likely familiar with both locations. They also suspect that the perpetrator has a history of violence and has likely killed before. Additionally, they believe he may have a criminal record involving domestic violence, as well as drug and alcohol abuse. Despite ongoing investigations, little progress has been made in identifying the 2018 Texas and Louisiana Jane Does, and both victims remain unidentified to this day. Moving on to the next case. Lucas Tranch. Lucas Tranch, known to his family and friends for his intelligence and insatiable curiosity, was a quiet yet compassionate and diligent leader. His deep passion for scouting, survivalism, and helping others was tragically cut short by his mysterious and unresolved disappearance in the late afternoon of March 18, 2015. His absence left those who knew him in his hometown of Bagnols-sur-Cèze, France, struggling for answers, lost in a web of evidence that only deepened their uncertainty. Born on April 18, 1999, Lucas was raised in the Gard department of southern France. He was the fourth of 5 children, joining 3 older brothers in the close-knit Tranch family, with a younger sibling arriving a few years later. To support their growing household, Lucas's parents, Eric and Natalie, both secured positions as engineers with the French Alternative Energies and Atomic Energy Commission. Their demanding but well-paying careers provided a stable and comfortable upbringing for Lucas and his siblings. From an early age, Lucas exhibited a natural affinity for the outdoors, showing a deep fascination with nature and all living things. He thrived in open spaces, eager to learn about the environment around him and the world as a whole. Even as a young child, his curiosity about nature was boundless. As a young boy, Lucas joined the Junior Scouts as an extracurricular activity, embarking on a multi-year scouting journey that continued into his teenage years. Through scouting, he developed essential survival skills and a deep understanding of the wilderness while also learning the values of charity, volunteerism, civic duty, and responsibility. A natural-born leader, Lucas thrived in guiding others while continuously pushing himself to achieve more, always making his parents, teachers, and instructors proud. Despite his strong dedication to scouting, he remained a well-rounded child, skillfully balancing academics with his various interests. Although not the most talkative, Lucas enjoyed participating in sports, particularly badminton, where he competed alongside teammates. He was also a skilled swimmer, a passion he shared with his brothers. While swimming wasn't his favorite activity, he consistently attended courses throughout his youth and adolescence, honing his athletic abilities. His unwavering determination and relentless drive for excellence ensured success in every challenge he faced, instilling in him a well-earned confidence. Given his love for sports and outdoor adventures with his fellow scouts, those who knew the 15-year-old often described him as introverted, preferring to keep to himself as he explored the world around him. Lucas was not distant or aloof. In fact, those closest to him described him as deeply connected to all living things, including the people around him. He cared deeply for his brothers, his parents, and his school friends, always ready to lend a helping hand. Whether assisting someone with their training or supporting a special project, Lucas never hesitated to sacrifice his time for others. His kindness and natural empathy were among his most defining traits, qualities that would have undoubtedly propelled him toward his dream career in adulthood. Everything seemed perfectly in place for his future until one fateful afternoon, when a series of mysterious events altered the course of his life forever. Now, let's examine the timeline leading up to Lucas's perplexing disappearance. A few months into 2015, sometime in February, Lucas began experiencing sudden difficulty sleeping. His father, Eric, noticed him tossing and turning at night, restless and unable to find comfort. As February progressed, those around him observed a shift in his demeanor. He seemed increasingly melancholic, particularly when away from home. Once again, no one could pinpoint the reason behind Lucas's melancholy, which was particularly noticeable when he was away from home. His father, Eric, observed another concerning sign when Lucas barely ate for several days in a row. However, his appetite eventually returned 2 days into the trip, and the family continued their vacation as usual. A month later, on Saturday, March 14th, Lucas spent the day with extended family, including a cousin he rarely saw but always enjoyed spending time with. That night through Sunday, March 15th, he joined his scout troop for a weekend camping trip, independent of adults' supervision. When he returned home that evening, Lucas told his father he had a fantastic time. In Eric's eyes, his son seemed to be back to his usual cheerful and optimistic self. The following school week proceeded as normal. On Monday and Tuesday, March 16th and 17th, Lucas attended school without any issues. On the evening of March 17th, he took part in his weekly badminton training at Cumberton Gymnasium, where neither his teammates nor his instructors noticed anything unusual. That night, he returned home in high spirits, expressing his excitement to Eric before heading to bed. Then came the morning of Wednesday, March 18th, 2015, a day that started like any other but would soon take a turn that no one could have predicted. The weather that morning was clear and pleasant, marking the arrival of spring. The Trench family woke up with the sunrise and followed their usual routine, getting dressed, having breakfast, and preparing for school or work. Eric and Natalie gathered their 3 sons still living at home, 15-year-old Lucas, 17-year-old Valentine, and 10-year-old Arthur. At exactly 7:45 a.m., Natalie dropped Lucas off in front of his school as part of her daily drive to work. He made his way to class and spent the morning engaged in his usual coursework, showing no signs of distress or anything unusual. His peers noted that he appeared to be in good spirits, seemingly happy and relaxed. Around 12:20 p.m., Lucas returned home for lunch, eating in the kitchen while chatting with Anik, the nanny of his youngest brother, Arthur. During their conversation, Anik informed Lucas that Arthur had been invited to a friend's birthday party that afternoon. However, Valentine was uninterested in accompanying her to Columbia, the residential area where the party was being held, just a few kilometers away. Lucas, always willing to help, agreed to join her and Arthur, and they began preparing to leave. A few minutes later, Anik pointed out a €20 note on the counter, which Natalie had left for them to buy a gift for Arthur's friend. On the way to the party, Lucas picked out a gift worth €7 and kept the remaining €13. Between 1 p.m. and 2:45 p.m., Lucas attended the birthday party with Arthur, once again displaying no signs that anything was wrong. He appeared just as cheerful and engaged as ever. Around 3 p.m., Lucas returned home with Arthur. Shortly after their arrival, Anik left on her own, leaving Lucas with his older brother, Valentine, who was preoccupied with playing on the family computer. At approximately 4 p.m., Lucas came downstairs from his bedroom for a snack. He then stepped outside and sat alone, seemingly focused on his phone. Valentine observed him through the window but couldn't determine exactly what he was doing. Their phone provider later confirmed that Lucas accessed mobile data around this time, though the specific apps or sites he used remain unknown. Another hour passed, and at around 5:05 p.m., Lucas and his brother, Valentine, began getting ready for their evening swim class at the public pool. Their usual routine involved taking a bus from the Gerd stop, located on the far side of the Schumann Bridge near their home, which they would reach using their kick scooters. However, on this particular evening, Lucas was running behind schedule despite Valentine's repeated attempts to hurry him along. Given that they typically left at exactly 5 p.m., the delay was unusual. Valentine, growing impatient, issued one final warning, urging Lucas to move faster. In response, Lucas assured him that he would lock up the house and meet him at the bus stop in a few minutes. This was the last confirmed interaction and sighting of Lucas Trench. At 5:10 p.m., Valentine left without him, and CCTV footage captured him crossing the Schumann Bridge alone, with no sign of Lucas following. Around the same time or shortly thereafter, someone, presumably Lucas, turned off his phone at 5:14 p.m. Between 5:15 and 5:30 p.m., a neighbor named Madeline saw a young man walking past her house. He was wearing a beige-gray jacket and heading in the opposite direction of the swimming pool. Though she wasn't entirely certain, she noted that he bore a strong resemblance to Lucas. At exactly 5:30 p.m., as the bus prepared to leave the stop, Valentine called Lucas's phone in hopes of reaching him. Lucas's phone goes straight to voicemail, but Valentine continues to swim practice, assuming his brother decided to stay home, perhaps feeling unwell or simply not in the mood to attend. Around 6 p.m., 30 minutes later, Natalie arrives home from work with Arthur. She finds the doors locked and the house completely empty, with no indication that Lucas had returned. 2 more hours pass, and at 8 p.m., Natalie drives to the Igurd bus stop to pick up both Lucas and Valentine. However, when she arrives, only Valentine is there. He explains that Lucas never showed up for swim practice and assumed he had either missed the bus or chosen to stay home. This revelation alarms Natalie, as she had been home for the past 2 hours and had seen no trace of Lucas. Natalie begins calling local hospitals, checking emergency departments to see if Lucas may have been admitted due to an accident. When this leads nowhere, she starts reaching out to his friends, hoping someone knows his whereabouts. By 11 p.m., Eric returns home from work and learns about Lucas's disappearance. Alarmed, he joins the search, and a manhunt begins. However, law enforcement finds no significant leads until the following day. At around 12:15 p.m. on Thursday, March 19th, a 35-year-old neighbor named Stephanie reports seeing a young man in red sprinting across her front yard while she was ironing. She notes that he was running in a specific direction but isn't able to identify him clearly. Meanwhile, Rashid Gamri, a close family friend of Eric and Natalie, joins a group of volunteers combing through the areas surrounding Banuel. During their search, Rashid spots a distinct shape at the top of a rocky peak in the distance. Alerting the others, they observe what appears to be the silhouette of a person. However, as dusk sets in, the fading light makes it impossible to make out any details. Deciding to investigate, Rashid and the group call out Lucas's name while moving toward the figure. As they approach, the silhouette abruptly stands up and walks away, vanishing into the twilight. In the days following Lucas's disappearance, French soldiers and an estimated 1,500 search and rescue volunteers scoured a 4-kilometer radius surrounding the Tranche residence and the River Ceres. The search efforts included cadaver dogs, professional divers, and helicopters equipped with thermal imaging and night vision. A large-scale social media campaign was launched, urging the public to remain vigilant, while missing person posters were distributed widely. One of the earliest forensic efforts involved detectives applying luminol throughout the Tranche household to detect traces of blood or DNA. Though the chemical revealed slight traces of a substance, further examination was needed to confirm whether it was blood or simply a residue from cleaning agents. As March progressed, potential sightings of Lucas surfaced. On Monday, March 23rd, at approximately 10:30 a.m., a group of search and rescue volunteers reported seeing a young man resembling Lucas standing in the hills above St. Gervais, observing vineyard workers before suddenly fleeing into the woods, eerily similar to Rashid Gamri's earlier sighting near the rocky peak. Later that same day, around 5 p.m., an anonymous 24-year-old motorcyclist claimed to have seen a lone teenager walking along an isolated path near Bagnères-sur-Cise, heading toward Espessin, a small hamlet. The motorcyclist, an experienced cannabis user, noted that the area contained hidden marijuana plants and speculated whether the teenager was aware of their presence. The motorcyclist continued to observe the teenager as he rode behind him, but eventually lost sight when the boy veered off onto a different path. 2 days later, on Wednesday, March 25th, the same motorcyclist entered a bakery and noticed Lucas's face on a missing persons flyer. Realizing the resemblance, he immediately contacted the police. Law enforcement brought him in for questioning, but the lead ultimately led to no significant discoveries. A few days later, on Saturday, March 28th, another possible sighting was reported. A teenage boy and his father claimed they saw someone resembling Lucas in Le Pontet of Valcus. The boy was reportedly accompanied by an older woman, estimated to be between 45 and 50 years old. However, after investigating the claim, authorities deemed the lead a dead end. With no solid evidence of voluntary disappearance and a growing number of unexplained circumstances, law enforcement began suspecting foul play. On March 30th, the district attorney officially opened a judicial investigation into abduction and illegal confinement. This theory was echoed by Lucas's parents, Eric and Natalie, who, in April 2015, publicly stated their firm belief that their son had not run away. They emphasized that Lucas had exhibited no signs of mental distress, suicidal tendencies, or a desire to escape his life. Determined to find answers, the Tranch family launched an extensive media campaign, appearing on multiple television programs and urging the public worldwide to aid in the search for Lucas. 6 months later, in October of 2015, detectives receive what they think is a major break in the case when the Tranch family starts finding a series of letters addressed to them from an anonymous sender who writes to inform them that Lucas is in good health and that they shouldn't worry. These letters continue until the following summer, when on July 12, 2016, the writer and sender is caught on CCTV at the sorting office submitting another letter. Police move in to arrest the sender and find he is a 57-year-old mythomaniac from Valence with absolutely connection to the case. The man is still incarcerated and sentenced to prison for at least 1 year. The last major clue uncovered by detectives occurs in December of 2016, 21 months after Lucas disappeared. The Tranch's house the day he went missing. The man is described as 5 foot 6 inches in his 40s, bald with tattoos on each forearm. The sketch brings in hundreds of tips, but nothing of use over the next 9 months, so the police sketch is refined in September of 2017. Just over a year later, in the October 2018, police finally apprehend the suspect depicted in their sketch and bring him in for questioning. They discover the man resides in Banjosur, says, the very town where Lucas lived, and was around the bus stop in question the day Lucas went missing, but otherwise has no discernible ties to the disappearance, and the tattooed man is let go. This is the last major update in the case thus far, despite renewed search efforts, yearly vigils held on the anniversary, and an entire non-profit organization being dedicated to finding Lucas Tranch. In a case as detailed and extensive as Lucas Tranch's disappearance, there are hundreds of points we could inspect, analyze, and dissect. However, there is one incident that keeps catching our eye, an incident related to the tattooed man we just mentioned, seen by a neighboring witness riding a bike in front of the Tranch residence, and then arrested 2 years later after his police sketch made rounds through the public consciousness. While the overarching scenario involving the tattooed man has been laid out by police, there are a few fuzzy details that need explaining. First and foremost, it was revealed after the tattooed man's arrest that he was a resident of Bagnall and lived in the area both before and during the height of the investigation. With this in mind, how could it have taken over 2 years to find a man with such iconic descriptors such as a short stature, a bald head, and specific tattoos on each forearm? It seems like a long time to miss such a character when he's walking around in broad daylight for years on end. Just feet from where Lucas was last seen. With that being said, it can be argued that a man who just so happened to be walking through Lucas's neighborhood could be nearly anyone and could have been just passing through the area, meaning the man seen that morning isn't the same man found by authorities 2 years later. We must assume that they questioned their tattoo man in October of 2018 to make sure he was in Banjul on March 18, 2015. But if he lived in the area, of course, the answer would be yes. There are reports that the tattooed man seen outside of the Tranch's home was also seen at the Eggard bus stop before Lucas and Valentine took the coach to swimming practice. There exist CCTV cameras around this area. It seems odd that with the technology available, authorities weren't able to apprehend the man sooner. The strange timing isn't the only thing amiss with the tattoo man's story, though. A year after Lucas went missing, the French news site Objective Guard published a 4-part piece detailing the investigation. In their research, they discover that the neighbor's tip about the tattooed man was at first considered with little importance, despite the fact that a print shop owner had a very strange and unsettling encounter with a potential connection a few months after Lucas disappeared. Objective Guard interviewed the printer, who gave the following statement paraphrased and translated from French to English. In either May or June of 2015, a tall, thin, dark, short-haired man entered the print shop. He sported tattoos on both arms, and rode in on a motorbike, a detail that stood out because he set his helmet by the entrance door. This man wasn't necessarily clean, but rather sweaty and unkempt. He told the print shop employees that he worked as an animator in a retirement home, and that night there was a lotto taking place. Thus, he wanted to make 3 posters of Lucas's missing person poster in addition to colored flyers to pass out at the events. The print shop made 30 and 50 of each respectively. However, what was odd about the ordeal is that out of the hundreds of posters they made for various relatives and business owners, the tattooed man was the only one who wanted 3 posters and flyers specifically. When the print shop charged the man $35, he claimed his print shop the following day to pay the fee instead. However, the next day no one came to offer payment. In fact, the print shop called the Banyule Town Hall and discovered they had no employees by the name of Mr. Durant, and he likely never existed at all. The tattooed man never made a reappearance. At first glance, this encounter seems to puzzle the guards at the scene. Why was he printing posters in such an unusual format? And why specifically for a lottery at a retirement home? What reason did he have for lying to the print shop about his father? Was it merely an attempt to avoid paying the €35 fee, or was it a deliberate move to prevent any traceability? Could he be the same tattooed man spotted by the neighbor, or perhaps the one taken into custody by police in 2018? If so, did investigators ever question him about this peculiar incident? It's possible. But based on police sketch data and the print shop owner's statement, this tattooed man was reportedly tall, whereas the original suspect was described as short. And what about the mysterious motorcyclist? Why was he so invested in Lucas's case? Was he a true suspect, or simply an unconventional yet well-intentioned citizen with a strong curiosity about the situation? It's impossible to say for certain, but questioning this mysterious figure could be the key to unlocking the truth behind Lucas Trench's disappearance. Now, let's examine the most prominent theories surrounding his case. Before law enforcement officially classified Lucas's disappearance as a potential kidnapping, many speculated that he may have left home voluntarily. At 15, Lucas possessed the skills and knowledge to survive in the wilderness, thanks to years of scouting. He was also an avid fan of Man vs. Wild, a survival reality show that showcased extreme outdoor survival tactics. However, the idea that Lucas would attempt to replicate the feats of a team of trained professionals simply because he enjoyed watching the show seems highly unlikely. He wasn't reckless or naive. That said, it's possible that his passion for nature and scouting could have fueled a desire to test his own survival skills. The timing is notable. Just days before his disappearance, Lucas had returned from a scouting retreat, which could have inspired him to embark on an adventure alone. Despite this possibility, several factors suggest that Lucas did not leave Banyule with the intention of living off the land. While some of his belongings were missing, the majority of his scouting gear remained at home, including his essential field knife. This raises doubts about the runaway theory and shifts the focus back to other possibilities, including foul play. According to the Trench parents, Lucas never went on a scouting mission, camping, or really anywhere outside of school without his knife. Lucas understood this to be the most valuable tool, and to leave it behind would be a severe lapse in judgment, and very out of his character, especially if he were on a quest to survive in the wilderness. Other items left behind were his sleeping bag, another vital piece of equipment, his ID, and most of his money, around $120. There was no food missing from the Trench's kitchen, and all of their possessions were found basically as they were. It hasn't been clarified exactly what was taken by Lucas in his small rucksack, but what we do know is it wasn't enough for long-term outdoor survival. It's still possible Lucas went out on his own solo camping, years of both education and recreation, and although a comforting thought to believe he left of his own volition, it simply doesn't add up. So if Lucas didn't plan a survivalist mission, is it possible he still left on his own for other purposes? Some believe so. Theorists point to Lucas's peculiar actions in the hours leading up to his disappearance, specifically his time spent outside away from his brother busy on his phone in the backyard. People wonder if Lucas may have been in contact with someone, setting up an appointment or rendezvous with a stranger unbeknownst to his family. This is the leading theory of Ratchet Gamery, the family friend we mentioned earlier. Ratchet believed Lucas met someone either online or in person, and set up a meeting on March 18th. Obviously, whatever happened at that meeting led to Lucas's disappearance. Lucas might have turned his phone off to prevent any distractions, or anyone attempting to communicate with him during the appointment, as he was doing so in secret. And if the other person he was meeting intended to kidnap him, he may have instructed Lucas to turn his phone off. But if Lucas had always intended to turn his phone off anyway, why take the phone at all? Lucas may have wanted it on his person just in case something went haywire. But obviously if things did, he never got the opportunity to turn it back on and use it. Sadly, the phone was one item never recovered, its fate resting with Lucas's as well. There are some complicated facets to this appointment theory. It's actually highly unlikely that Lucas met someone online, as he was hard drive and internet activity. Detectives felt there were no digital or web-related leads to be had. The same The same can be said about his phone records too. While the physical device is missing, the Trench's telephone providers did perform a scan of his data both prior to and March 18, 2015, but what access this was is unknown. They also determined the phone had not been turned on since 5:14 p.m. of the same day, another gloomy and disheartening piece of evidence. Eric and Natalie did not give up hope, and mentioned to police that Lucas did occasionally archive upon arrival on personal devices, but they are stored forever in Snapchat servers. It took almost a year to retrieve the results, but in early 2016, Natalie informed reporters that records indicated Lucas did not send or receive a Snapchat message on March 18th, nor was he communicating with anyone out of the ordinary via the app, ending the possibility that he met someone online. Obviously, this doesn't rule out the idea that Lucas met someone in person, but interested in friends along with their parents were interviewed, and not once did any of them mention Lucas interacting with strangers, or even inviting that possibility. It is certainly not impossible, but from investigative practices undergone bizarre circumstances, and that involves the theory of the missing stones. One of Lucas's many fascinations was geology, collecting stones and precious rocks in his spare time. Natalie mentioned after he went missing that Lucas was known to leave simply to go and gather stones and search the surrounding areas for interesting rocks. She recalled that in December of 2014, Lucas started coming home with these heavy, funny-looking stones, almost little collecting the stones, sometimes picking up similar pebbles of even smaller size. The collection kept growing, and before he knew it, Lucas had discovered kilos upon kilos of the so-called meteorite stones. If that is what the rocks actually were, bits of extraterrestrial mineral, the lot could be worth hundreds if not thousands of euros. In a disappointing twist, Eric Troench learned the stones were actually just broken pieces of medieval forged slag. While still unique pieces of rock, these stones would in reality only be worth a few euros. However, Lucas might not have been aware of this, and it should be mentioned that some of the strange stones were missing from Lucas's room the day he disappeared. Not only that, but not long before that fateful day, Lucas was sighted at Banyal Street Market in front of a small stand operated by a man selling unique stones. Whether or not Lucas bought these stones, or other materials from the mysterious merchant is unknown, and attempts to track him down have been fruitless, as the merchant has since abandoned the Banyan market and presumably left the area entirely. But this does undeniably feel a little suspicious. Before any conspiracies are drawn, it must be stated that the odds are highly coincidental, and that is all it may be, just a coincidence, yet it does appointment with as theorized earlier? What if the merchant was grooming Lucas with stories about meteorites, building trust to the point where he could kidnap Lucas under the pretense of taking him with him to find more of these valuable stones? This would also explain why the stones are still missing from Lucas's room, because Lucas was going on what he perceived as a stone-collecting endeavor with the self-proclaimed experts, and that's where things went awry. It's a haunting scenario to imagine playing out, but at least must be considered as it can't be ruled out until the banjo stone merchant is found and interrogated. And until this time, a suspect he must remain. Other theories suggest that whatever happened to Lucas was accidental, and not necessarily a result of kidnapping or planned abduction. What if Lucas really did go out in the woods by himself for a camping trip, and wound up the victim of a hunting accident? Eric Trench wondered that himself early in the investigation, and investigators at the Objective Guard followed that theory up, interviewing the president of the Banyal hunting organization. The president informed Tony a 2015 boar hunt was indeed extended until March 31st of that year, and there were confirmed shots fired in the woods near the Seduran neighborhood where Lucas lived. However, he also noted that any hunting accident in the area would have left a body behind, as those woods were searched meticulously in the weeks that followed. He also stated that hunters work in pairs, and none of his group members reported anything or failed to return from their excursion. Again, this scenario isn't impossible, but there is simply zero evidence to support it unless a massive cover-up is underway. Another theory of accidental basis suggests that when Lucas left his home, he was struck by a car, and the driver stashed the body out of plain sight, or took off with the body themselves. This theory has actually been embraced by both authorities, and Lucas's family more so than the ones we've listed thus far. Initially, it may be hard to reconcile with the idea that a human being could kill another by accident, and then hide it or never report it, but it is a more common occurrence than we might like to believe. The driver may not have had insurance, or simply panicked when they struck a young boy. Investigate this idea by calling mechanics both in and around Bagnall, and asking them if they had worked on any damaged vehicles in the 15 days following March 18th that may hint at a hit and run. The query took years to complete, and didn't draw any useful leads, but it's possible the driver could have slipped through the cracks by either driving out of the county, or by never fixing the car at all, getting rid of it along with Lucas. So if Lucas didn't leave on his own volition, and his disappearance wasn't inexplicable vanishing? It's generally agreed upon that Lucas was not abducted from the Farrelly home. There were no signs of forced entry. There were no valuables stolen, and as we stated previously, Lucas did take a few items, including his phone, and locked the door behind him. For all intents and purposes, Lucas left the house by himself, but what happened right after that could have turned nefarious. If Lucas was kidnapped on his walk around the area, who might have pulled off this scheme? There aren't a ton of famous serial kidnappers or murderers connected to the case, but one prominent name thrown around early on was Nadal Lelandis, a convicted serial killer responsible for at least 2 deaths, and thought to be the killer in 2 other homicide investigations. Nadal was ruled out of the Trench case because of an analysis of his cell phone's GPS, which showed he was more than 100 miles away from the area on March 18th. However, he was considered a regular in the public places around guards and had family members residing near Banuel Sauceres at the time. Could he have left his phone behind on the day to thwart tracing? It seems unlikely, and seeing as how investigators have completely ruled him out as a suspect, we can say with a degree of certainty that it was not Nordau. Authorities began to worry they had an anonymous serial kidnapper on their hands who had yet to be caught when on March 1, 2016, almost a year to the day of Lucas's disappearance, a 16-year-old boy by the name of Antoine Zoyer went missing from the village of Clansac, a mere 38 miles from Bagnall. In a similar vein, Antoine left his home in the afternoon around 1:30 p.m. and was last seen buying cigarettes from a tobacco shop in town. He was described as very similar in demeanor to Lucas, and was also majoring in science as a second-year student. However, any connection between the 2 boys and sharing a potential perpetrator was ruled out in October of 2018 when the decomposed body of Antoine was found hanging from a tree in the abandoned woodlands near Clarence Sack. Foul play was ruled out after a thorough investigation. If Lucas was kidnapped or killed, his offender did not strike again in the area to the best of our knowledge, his case being the only one of its kind in accordance with his demographics and time frame in which it happened. But there is someone else. He's seen a teenage boy walking on a remote path, followed him, and then reported him to police 2 days later when he saw Lucas's missing person poster in a bakery. There may be more about him than what meets the eye. Objective Guard reported in their 4-part investigative articles back in 2016 that when this man reported seeing the teenager on March 23, he gave details about Lucas to police that not even the missing persons poster police were initially struck by this. But after questioning the man, they did not seem impressed by his sighting. Suspicions go beyond just a few peculiar statements. The man's Facebook profile, according to Objective Guard, included numerous eyebrow-raising posts, including photos of the man in the act of using drugs, and public posts about how he desired to be a hired killer. When Objective Guard reached out to him in an attempt to meet and interview him for the story, the man declined despite a promise of anonymity. He was the only person to have spotted Lucas who declined to do so, despite the fact that should his testimony be true, he is the last one to see Lucas alive. Now, certainly none of this is grounds for arrest, or even sufficient to come to the conclusion that the man could be a killer. These case points are circumstantial at best. Sure, there are plenty of incidents throughout history of the killer in a murder investigation returning to the scene of the crime, or involving themselves with police or the media for some sick self-fulfilling purpose. However, it is a rarity. If the man on the motorcycle was culpable in some way, telling the police voluntarily that he saw Lucas would be a catastrophically risky move. That being said, the circumstances are undeniably suspicious. His testimony also raises questions. If that was Lucas out on the abandoned pathways on March 23, what was he doing out there for 5 days? How did he survive the 5 nights without shelter, food, or equipment? Hundreds upon hundreds of people were searching for him, looking behind every tree, under every rock in the area surrounding Banhall, yet he was seen walking in broad daylight a mere 10 kilometers from his home. How did he avoid detection by thermal cameras, and helicopter patrols, and trained cadaver dogs, and soldiers of the French Guard? It simply doesn't line up. Maybe the man on the motorcycle did see a teenage boy, and attributed his identity to Lucas after putting the pieces together incorrectly upon seeing Lucas's flyer. Or maybe his testimony really is the truth. Maybe he truly did follow Lucas into the wilderness. Until we know for certain, it must at least be considered, included with the numerous other theories swirling around Lucas Tranch's seemingly never-ending case. Before we divulge our hypothesis of Lucas Tranch's unsolved disappearance, we want to make it known that our conclusions are purely logical speculation based on evidence, circumstance, and factual subtext. We are only privy to the same information presented in each episode, and we do not attempt to promise certainty or an expert guarantee on the findings we reach in closing. We simply observe, research, and report. In the case of Lucas Tranch, we believe that Lucas did intend to leave his house that evening of March 18, 2015, but not as a test of his survival skills or a whimsical camping trip gone haywire. Rather, when looking at Lucas's behavior in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, the signs point in the direction that Lucas was struggling with something, albeit silently. His parents have spoken at length about how Lucas was a happy teenager with a lot of positivity and hope, with a bright future he was excited about, and we do not want to discredit those beliefs, or undermine the two people that knew Lucas the best. However, it bears mentioning that too often teenagers struggle with emotional distress or mental illness without even showing a symptom. Sadly, this is a byproduct of the world we live in which young people, perhaps young boys especially, are told to hide their true feelings, to act tough, and to never be vulnerable. While we're not saying this is how Lucas was taught or raised, the present culture constantly unloading unfair expectations on teenagers and adolescents has to be considered. The comments made about Lucas struggling to sleep and finding things he once found enjoyable and fun to be lackluster or disengaging are unspoken anxiety, and just hidden it well around his friends at school or coaches at practice. The outdoors and scouting may have been his solace, and thus camping provided relief from emotional distress. Natalie Tranch did say that he liked to go on walks, and if combined with his love of collecting stones, that may have been the escape affirmative conclusion about what happened after he walked outside of his house. Lucas's behavior was not medically diagnosed, and to say for certain that Lucas was based on circumstantial readings. Of course, it is possible that he left with the intent not to return. He didn't run away to start a new life, but perhaps to end his own. Maybe that is why he took his precious stones with him, as those are what comforted him and brought him joy. It is a devastating theory, but one that is worth consideration. With that said, it is simply a theory, and there is no proof that Lucas is dead, and the chance he is still alive remains the same. It is also possible Lucas was taken by someone the day he disappeared. Who that could be is impossible to say, as the list of suspects is infinite at this point. Was the Bagnall rock merchant involved? What about the tattooed man from the print shop? What about the man on the motorcycle, theoretically the last person to see Lucas alive? We could run in circles for the rest of our lives trying to play a game of Clue, and draw up potential suspect lineups from case points already cleared by police. Instead, we must remain vigilant in seeking out new clues, and continuing to spread the word, sharing Lucas's photo, whether it be in France, or Europe, or anywhere in the world. At this time, all avenues must remain vigilant in memory the way he deserves. Lucas was a shining memory the way he deserves. Lucas was a shining example of promising and precious life. He took each step with purpose and intention, finding the beauty of the natural world, and balancing that with schooling, and loving friendships, and family, balancing that with schooling, and loving friendships, and family relationships. Lucas had a unique ability to bring joy to those around him, even when he wasn't feeling his best. A dedicated student with a promising future as a veterinarian, his deep connection to animals and nature reflected his compassionate spirit, an uncommon trait for someone so young. Lucas never allowed the world to steer him away from his aspirations. Instead, he focused on what mattered most and put his heart into making a difference. At his core, Lucas was someone who tirelessly sought to improve the world around him. Whether it was people, animals, plants, or even a simple stone left unnoticed on a deserted path, he saw value in everything. Lucas should not be remembered solely as a missing person, but as a soul who radiated kindness, hope, and life. With his remarkable ability to find beauty in all things, we want to end by reminding anyone facing emotional, mental, or physical struggles that it's okay to seek help. Too often, mental health challenges are overlooked or stigmatized, but acknowledging them and reaching out is a vital and human step toward healing. You are never truly alone, and you never will be. As a community, we must support one another if we hope to create real change. Life and happiness are always worth fighting for. Likewise, if you notice someone who might be struggling, even if the signs are subtle, take a moment to check in on them. A simple question, a kind word, or just being there to listen can make a world of difference. Most importantly, always remember that your life matters. No matter where you are in this moment, there is a path forward, and you will emerge even stronger for having faced the challenges before you. Moving on to the next case. Patricia Beard. Patricia Beard, a 32-year-old woman from Denver, Colorado, lived with a mental disability. Fortunately, her family frequently checked in on her, either by calling or visiting to ensure she was doing well. After several days of failed attempts to reach her, they sensed that something was wrong. On March 27, 1991, a concerned family member discovered Patricia in her studio apartment. Tragically, she had been killed. Investigators determined that she had been strangled, and evidence suggested that the perpetrator had climbed a pipe and entered through a window. Police collected DNA samples from the scene, hoping they would prove useful in the future. In February 2011, the DNA evidence was entered into a database, but no match was found. In 2013, investigators finally found a DNA match, linking the crime to 53-year-old Hector Bencomo Hinojos from Pennsylvania. When questioned, Hector insisted he had never met Patricia and had no connection to her. However, the DNA evidence told a different story. At first, he feigned ignorance, but once he realized there was no way out, he pleaded guilty. His wife later informed police that he was an extremely violent man. She recalled how he would slap her for not ironing his clothes properly, and always carried a sharp pocket knife. On at least 6 occasions, He brought home boxes filled with china, silverware, and other valuables, claiming he was holding them for friends. In 2015, Hector was sentenced to 48 years in prison. Patricia's case became the 100th cold case successfully solved by the Denver Police Department. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.